Hello and welcome to the Walrus Talks at Home, Teens in Screens, presented by Brain Canada and with support from RBC Future Launch. I'm Jennifer Hollett. I'm the Executive Director of the Walrus, and I also get to be your host and moderator this evening. We are thrilled to be joining you online, live, bringing together people across the country and beyond in conversation today on World Mental Health Day. I'd like to start by acknowledging the land that I'm on in Toronto, Ontario, Toronto. A land acknowledgement helps us recognize history, thinking about how it informs where we are now and what changes can be made going forward in a commitment to reconciliation. Our offices and where I am in downtown Toronto are located within the bounds of Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas the Credit. This land is also the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and Toronto is home to many diverse First Nation, Inuit, and Métis peoples. At the Walrus, we're honored to carry on a long tradition of storytelling, and we welcome you to take a moment to reflect on the land that you're on, wherever you're joining us from today. As part of the ongoing work of reconciliation, if you haven't already or done so recently, we encourage you to read the 94 calls to action recommended by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. A bit about the Walrus. The Walrus started as an optimistic project just over 2 decades ago, and the goal is to foster conversations across Canada. We recognize that these conversations are complex and necessary, so they take place in many forms. You can find our journalism online at thewalrus.ca, but also in print on newsstands or by subscription. And you can also listen to our podcasts or be a part of events just like this one. And this work is powered by our community, our donors, our supporters, and our partners. So thank you all for being here, and to Brain Canada and RBC Future Launch for making this event possible. To start tonight's conversation, I'd like to welcome Brain Canada's President and CEO, Dr. Viviane Poupon, to share a few words.
Thank you, Jennifer. And so on behalf of Brain Canada, I'd like to welcome you to what promises to be a great discussion on social media and teen mental health. Over the next hour, we will hear from 4 important voices and gain insight into research, advocacy, and privacy concerns as we explore the question, does social media harm adolescents' mental health? Before the conversation begins, I'd like to thank you for everyone around who's tuning from across the country, around the world, and a special thanks to the Walrus for organizing the event. The impact of social media on the developing brain has been front and center in recent months, with growing concern about whether there are links between rising rates of depression and anxiety in teens and the amount of time they spend scrolling on platforms like Instagram, Snapchat, and TikTok. And as school boards put in place measures to restrict cell phone use, and we hear educators argue that social media platforms affect learning, disrupt the teaching environment, and are designed to be addictive, we are asking the question, what does the science say? Social media was designed to bring us together. Is it actually increasing our social isolation? As a national charitable organization and the country's only research funder focused exclusively on the brain, Brain Canada is invested in bringing science and evidence-based policy recommendation to this discussion. At Brain Canada, we believe that the way forward during this transformative time is to leverage scientific insights to address the challenges and the opportunities of social media. And so with that, I would like to thank you, and we hope you enjoy the discussion.
Thank you so much. Tonight's speakers are going to share a range of perspectives on the evolving study of technology's impact on developing minds and mental health. And I'm going to tell you, if I'm being honest, I'm like this, and I'm not a digital native. So it's natural and in many ways, a necessity in this time for young people to be looking to screens. But so many of us have big questions on what impact that has on them, especially as they are in adolescence and growing and changing and evolving. We are going to be learning about the importance of supporting emotional literacy in today's technology-driven world, but also the important role that young people play themselves in shaping their future when it comes to digital rights and safety. With the Walrus Talks at home, each speaker will give their talk, and it goes one after the other, live. This is going to be followed by a moderated Q&A session with our talkers and you, our audience at home. So feel free at any point to submit your question in the comments section. And when you post your question, let us know where in the country or in the world you're joining us from this evening. We also, of course, encourage you to share this conversation on social media. You can use the hashtag Walrus Talks and tag us at The Walrus. Bit about our speakers this evening. You'll be hearing from Dr. Emma Duerden, Associate Professor in Canada Research Chair in Neuroscience and Learning Disorders at Western University, and a recipient of a Future Leaders in Canadian Brain Research Program grant from Brain Canada. Keith Baybayon, Youth Advisory Council Chair for the Information and Privacy Commissioner of Ontario. Dr. Candice Odgers, Professor of Psychological Science and Informatics, University of California, Irvine, and co-director of the Child and Brain Development Program at CIFAR, as well as Sophie Grégoire Trudeau, mental health advocate and author of Closer Together. Thank you all for being a part of this event, and we're going to begin tonight with Dr. Emma Duerden. Emma, over to you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Hi, I'm Dr. Emma Duerden. Imagine this, seeing on your social media feed a video of a teen filming themselves while standing on top of a moving commuter train, also known as train surfing, or a video of a teen eating laundry detergent or eating food that's been cooked in cold medication. While it sounds dystopian or part of an imagined world, these are real social media trends and challenges, some of which have been copied and reposted over 200,000 times, despite them being associated with some pretty serious risks. So these extreme behaviors highlight a crucial but well-known truth, that the teen brain is tuned in for rewards and challenges while often disregarding dangers and risks. And with social media, with each like and share, this can only feed into that reward system, offering instant gratification. So a big question is why? And should we be worried about what social media is doing to kids' brains? So I want to focus on three main questions. So the first is, what makes the teen brain so different from that of a child versus an adult? And the second is, we all know that not all teens are using social media in the same way. So who is most at risk? And thirdly, if social media is associated with changes in the brain in some individuals, then what could we do about it? Could these changes be reversible? So to answer the first question, the impulsive decision-making that we see in teens is a result of a developmental mismatch in the brain. We have the reward system developing very early in infancy and childhood. So we know that it's easy to get a child to change their behavior based on a reward. But in the teen brain, regions involved in social connectedness are also becoming mature. And this allows them to be more sensitive to emotions, to social cues, social comparisons, but also seeking validation in others. And lastly, we have the brain's cognitive control center, our frontal lobes. This is the decision-making center of the brain. It's responsible for controlling our impulses, putting the brakes on the reward system, but also regulating our emotions. And this brain region really fully matures in our 20s and 30s. And what's more is that for this cognitive control center is very sensitive to the neurochemicals that are released when we're exposed to rewards. And one such neurochemical is dopamine. So dopamine is a feel-good chemical. So when you're driving in your car and your favorite song comes on the radio or your favorite sports team scores a goal, that rush that you get is from dopamine. But if we're exposed to a lot of rewards, as in the case of social media, over time, individuals can start seeking out more and more of the same rewards in order to get that same initial rush that they had at the beginning. And exposure to a lot of rewards can even impact our brain's ability to process dopamine. So we know that teens can be very sensitive to these social cues. And so we know that these cognitive control centers, while they're very sensitive, that when we're being released to these neurochemicals, that in turn they may crave more and more rewards. And so for teens who may be caught up in this digital consumption spiral, chasing out that next dopamine hit, they can also be exposed to a number of negative and adverse consequences, negative and emotional stimuli online. And this in turn can, because they have an immature cognitive control center, this in turn can affect their ability to regulate their emotions. And they can also place them at risk for anxious and depressive behaviors. So this brings me to my second point of who is most at risk. So we know that teens with undiagnosed or diagnosed mental health conditions like anxiety and depression, they could be at risk, or teens who have a neurodevelopmental disorder like ADHD. These individuals could be more likely to seek out social media for that initial rush, but also be less likely to manage their emotions. We know that the content in terms of what teens are viewing online is also important. Exposure to stressful and negative content can in turn activate the body's stress response system and have a number of adverse effects on both the brain and the body. And we also know that the time spent on social media is time that can be spent doing other things that are really important for healthy brain development, like exercise, interacting with others in person, and sleep. So sleep is really important for regulating emotions, for learning and memory, for regulating stress, and for dopamine. And we know that sleep loss is associated with, it can be a risk factor for adverse mental health outcomes. So this brings me to my last point concerning who is most, if for those individuals, if there is changes in the brain, then what could we do about it? Could these changes be reversed? Well, we know that there's no brain imaging study to date that has looked at the withdrawal of social media. But we do know that for children who've been exposed to very high levels of early life stress, those exposed to trauma or those experiencing anxiety, that environmental factors and supports, interventions, things like counseling can be associated with healthy brain adaptation. So in summary, the adolescent brain may be more vulnerable to the adverse effects of social media. And ultimately, with time being finite in a day, the greatest challenge that we may face is limiting viewing time on these platforms to promote healthy development in youth. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you to the Walrus for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Baybayon, and I'm currently a third-year student at McGill University. For the past 2 years, I've had the privilege of serving as the chair of the Youth Advisory Council for the Information and Privacy Commission of Ontario. In 2023, I was also fortunate enough to be part of Canada's first ever Youth Assembly on Digital Rights and Safety. These experiences have reinforced a crucial lesson for me. In today's digital world, youth voices can't just be heard. They must be at the forefront, driving the conversation and shaping the solutions that affect us all. As we've all experienced, digital technologies are a vital part of everyday life. For many of us, the internet is where we connect, learn, and express ourselves. But we also know that this constant connectivity comes at a cost, especially to our mental health. Young people have grown up online, immersed in a world of social media and digital tools, and we've been navigating the impact of these technologies on our well-being for as long as we can remember. At the IPC Youth Advisory Council, one of our key priorities is championing the access and privacy rights of young people while promoting their digital literacy. Why? Because we know that technology has real consequences on how we think, how we feel, and how we understand ourselves. From the addictive design of apps to the endless pressure to be constantly connected, these technologies have been shaping our lives, often in ways that aren't always positive. When I joined Canada's first ever Youth Assembly on Digital Rights and Safety, we came together to tackle these issues head on. The Assembly brought together 35 youth from across the country, all with different experiences, but one shared reality. The digital world is deeply embedded in our lives. We know the advantages, like the communities we build and the endless flow of information, but we also know the dangers, which is the ways in which social media harms our mental health. In our final report, we highlighted that youth are facing unprecedented challenges, from cyberbullying to harmful algorithms and the addictive nature of social platforms. These issues aren't just abstract, they affect our day-to-day lives. Many of us have witnessed the decline in youth mental health, where rates of anxiety, and depression among teens have skyrocketed, coinciding with the rise in screen time and social media use. So how do we support the mental health of youth in this digital age? Our first step is acknowledging that young people are not just passive users of technology. We are active participants in these digital spaces. That's why it's so important that our voices are central in the decision-making processes. At the IPT Youth Advisory Council, we've been working on initiatives like the Youth Ambassador Toolkit, which empowers young people to educate their peers about privacy and digital literacy. We've also provided input on the Ontario Digital Privacy Charter, a set of commitments designed to ensure that schools and educational institutions protect the privacy of students. These are tools and policies shaped by youth for youth to protect our mental health in a world increasingly dominated by technology. And at the Youth Assembly, we push for recommendations that reflect the lived experiences of young people today. We've called for the creation of a regulatory body to oversee the impact of platforms on youth, stricter privacy settings by default, and greater transparency from social media companies. But most importantly, we insisted that youth be included in the process, because who better to address the harms we face than young people themselves? One of our key recommendations was the need for offline periods, especially in academic settings, where the pressure to be constantly online is damaging both our mental health and our ability to focus. We also stress the importance of regulating algorithms that prioritize engagement over well-being, especially when those algorithms are designed to exploit our insecurities and keep us hooked. Our report also emphasized the right of Canadian youth to develop our identities and express ourselves online safely. We shouldn't have to navigate the minefield of predatory algorithms, exploitation, and violations of privacy just to exist in digital spaces. As I reflect on these experiences, one thing is clear. If we want to support youth mental health in the digital age, we need to create systems that prioritize well-being over profit. We need platforms to take responsibility for the harm their products cause, and we need policymakers to create environments where youth can thrive, both online and offline. But we can't do this alone. We need to work together, youth, educators, policymakers, child welfare experts, to ensure that mental health remains at the forefront of these conversations. Today's youth have grown up in a digital world, and no one understands its complexities better than we do. The IPC is a prime example of the benefits of giving youth a seat at the table, as they ensure that the voices of young people are not only heard, but are driving solutions. In closing, I want to leave you with this. The digital world is evolving quickly, and youth are at the forefront of this change. We're not just users of technology, we are its future. And with the right policies designed by and for youth, we can ensure that technology works for us, not against us. Thank you.
I'm Candice Odgers. I'm a developmental psychologist. I trained in developmental and quantitative psychology, and I've worked on adolescent mental health for 20 years, starting actually on the streets of Vancouver with young children who'd been sexually exploited. Since 2008, I've been following young people around on their digital devices, on their mobile phones, and we've been capturing in daily life their mental health, their sleep, the types of things they experience both offline and online, and how those interact to influence their mental health. And so I'm happy to be with you today because this is an issue that's top of mind for everyone. I'm also a parent of tweens. So I have an 11-year-old and a 14-year-old. So I live this along with all of you every day. And in this short time, I just wanted to leave you with kind of 3 things that I've learned along this pretty long journey looking at this. The first thing, and I think maybe the reason that many of us are here today, is adults don't like this, right? So we do not like what social media looks like. We don't like what it feels like. We don't like watching our young people spend all this time on it. Now, one of the charges is that this is just another moral panic, the same thing we did with romance novels or comic books or video games or television. And, that might be true. It feels like we're at a height of a moral panic for sure, but there's also been massive changes in some of the real types of risks that we just heard Keith review here. So the frame that we tend to take is of risks and benefits, of ways that we can use this big tent perspective, bringing all of the stakeholders together to minimize those risks, right? And optimize opportunities and benefits, because the online world is not going away anytime soon, and we need to design it together in ways that support our young people. Now, the second point I'm going to make is going to be kind of surprising, and this can often take people off guard because it's not the typical point that people will make. And this is the point that the story that most of you have heard about social media's impacts on the brain and on mental health is not actually supported by the science. It's a story that's told very broadly and very compellingly. But if you look at the overall scientific evidence, and the National Academies of Sciences actually convened a panel and did this, spent a year reviewing the evidence, taking testimony. And what they concluded is that there's these tiny associations between social media and mental health. They're sometimes positive, they're sometimes negative. There's no real causal connection that's been established, right, in terms of the bulk of our evidence. And the biggest thing is this distance between what the science to date says about this connection and what people strongly believe. So that's been a really fascinating area for me to explore as we've followed young people around and over time. What we do find is young people that are struggling with mental health issues do spend a little more time online. They use social media in different ways. But what we find is that those young people that are struggling, it predicts forward. They go on to use social media in different ways versus vice versa. So we have to worry about which direction we're drawing this arrow in. And that's been an important thing to consider. And the last thing that I want to touch on, thinking about this kind of unsettled science, I think many of us are assuming that these impacts are negative. We've been told that smartphones have destroyed a generation. We've been told that social media is destroying our children's brains and driving an epidemic of mental illness, even though the epidemiologists, even though the psychologists, even though the people that have reviewed this literature are not finding that story, to be true. And that's leading to some pretty aggressive solutions in this space. Some of them might work. Most of them, we don't know. But these are young people. These are people that deserve careful review of the evidence. They deserve evidence-based policymaking. And so when we talk about shutting off smartphones or banning phones or putting some pretty harsh restrictions on those, I think we need to ask ourselves, what are we shutting off? What are we taking away? And what are the costs of that? So when we talk about bans, for example, and I'm sure there'll be lots of questions around that, and school districts and others go forward to put through bans, saying that they're saving young children's mental health, we have to ask whether or not that's actually what the outcome is of those types of procedures, and what types of access to information, to technology, to friendships, the types of things that Keith mentioned that young people also spend their time doing online, are we shutting down? So I'm really excited that the Walrus has invited us all here to have this kind of big tent conversation. There are no easy solutions or simple stories in this space, so it's great to convene in this way. And thank you.
Wow. I've been a mental health advocate for 20 years now, and it's just a title. When you start believing in titles or positions or whatever your accomplishments are, I think you're a little bit disconnected from life and from yourself. So I can only speak from experience. I suffered from eating disorders and anxiety when I was a teenager and into my adult years. And it's part of the reason why I wrote the book Closer Together. But the main thing that I've been, I would say, interested in and looking at the science and the data and the research, which is extremely important because all of this happens so quickly in our lives, right? And the fact that human beings, we're not supposed to be this sedentary. We're not supposed to be sitting in front of a screen and not moving all day. We're not really supposed to be having our eyes look at something from up close so much because it causes vision trouble. We're not supposed to be constantly stimulated every second of the day with different information because it does cause difficulty in attention span. So there's a lot of research and data showing that our ways of living do affect the way we process information, the way we are in our nervous systems as well. We are all human beings with a nervous system right now. If I came to you today and you were in your alert mode, that almond-shaped amygdala in your brain, which is your alert mode, it prevents you from running into danger. If there's a car coming out on the street, for example, what's happening now is that we're not all sick. And mental health is not just the absence of mental illness. It is the fabric of our lives, how we sleep, how we consume, what we consume, where we bring our attention to, how we treat ourselves, how we view others, how we sleep, how we eat, how we exercise. And we are, in a way, and even the amygdala, and science is proving this, is reacting in a normal way to abnormal circumstances. So we have to be very careful when it comes to mental health to not pathologize too quickly our states of being, because we're also reacting to abnormal circumstances of living that humans have not been used to for hundreds, thousands of years. And so we come into the world with the two most visceral inherent needs. This is universal. It's every single human being. So attachment, to be taken care of in a constant, quality, beautiful, present way by a caregiver, a parent, a grandmother, an auntie, whoever is the person who took care of you, was there and was constant and really validated who you were, your needs, your perception of reality. This gave you a sense of trust to the world and to your surroundings. And this trust is called epistemic trust, is validated by the person who took care of you. And it really follows you for your whole life because it leaves a wiring in your brain. And the science and the data have been showing this for many, many years, that you carry into every single relationship that you have in your life after, as an adult. So the more we're willing to look at how we are wired in our own personality, from our nervous system to, how we react to others and how we react to fear or anxiety or stress, because stress is normal in life. So that's for the attachment part of how we come into this world. Then there's the authenticity part. And here's where social media and authenticity have kind of like this very, very direct and important relationship. So authenticity is your capacity to be able to express who you are without having to change your behavior to please. Now, everybody stop for 1 second. We all do it. We all change our behavior since we are children to please our parents in different ways, to feel a love and validation. And we learn that as we go into life and as we grow as teenagers and young adults. When we live on platforms and we're exposed to this information where we can't really be our authentic self, where we are constantly rewarded for self-betrayal, change the way you look, from your hair to your eyelashes, to your nails, to your body, to your teeth, to everything, or change the way you behave. So you look, less vulnerable and stronger, or whatever these messages are that we're getting as women or men or boys and girls that are not authentic to our true nature. Now, when we don't live in our authenticity, we can become sick, not only physically, but mentally. So it's very hard to believe that there is no correlation between the way that we consume social media, and I did say the way that we consume social media, and the way we live, and the state of our mental health. Now, mental health, even the expression, in some way, I would like to call it our wild wholeness, because mental, we think, is here, but we have a brain in the head, we have a brain in the heart, which is a nervous system filled with the capacity for seeing negative events, and a brain in the gut, because now we know that we can't separate the brain from the heart and the gut, and our gut and the way that you eat and what you put into your body communicates with your brains constantly. 75% of the signals that are exchanged between the brain and the gut is coming from the gut. And this is absolutely fascinating. So now that we talk about mental health, we can no longer talk about mental health without talking about gut health. And, one thing that I've been noticing, meeting young people from across this country and outside in the world, with the luck that I've had to be able to connect with so many different human beings from different walks of life completely, is we're all one trauma away from each other. It takes one dramatic life event to change your brain, change the way you perceive your own body, your own nervous system, change the way you interact with others. Now, if I had come to you tonight with a neutral face, but you were in your alert mode, and I started saying that at the beginning, now you'll understand why. If I had come to you with a neutral face, but you were in your alert mode and you already felt threatened by the world, you could interpret my neutral face as aggressive. So now think about the state of the world. Think about the state of our schools, of our families, for the people who don't even find emotional safety in their own families, of your circle of friends, of society and the world, from a bird's eye view, and look at how people are treating each other. The more fragile you are inside of you, this does not mean vulnerable. It means the less aware you are of your own personality wiring and why you act and react the way you do in your life, the more threatened you will be by others' difference. So mental health is a way of being, of respecting, of being authentic, and of living in your truth inside of your body from a physical and nervous system perspective and from a psychological perspective, and those cannot be dissociated. Now, there's a beautiful poetry and dance to this life between the light and the darkness. And I think that young people, you carry this fire, you carry this love, this question, this curiosity for your own heroic quest of becoming who you are. And you're living in very difficult circumstances. And I walk with you because it's not easy. It really isn't. And I have 2 teenagers and a 10-year-old, so I was seeing it firsthand. But there is a difference between solitude, which you should have a right to, the right to have enough self-knowledge to sit with yourself and feel peaceful and not feel threatened by that silence. And then there's loneliness, which really correlates more with isolation. And the more we are on screens, the less time we spend with each other, the more isolated we can feel. And also, from a very young age, when we as parents are too on top of our kids and are trying to control their lives and activities and always keeping them busy, we don't foster that sense of wise solitude that we all long to sit with in peace and silence as human beings. And so by controlling everything, we're not allowing children to experience the phase of low risk, low cost. You fall off your bike, you hurt your knee. You fall up the branch of the tree, you're scorched. You'll be okay. Nobody's saying, oh my God, are you okay? It's the end of the world. No. You go out there and you experience. So that period of childhood of low risk, low cost, your brain and your body is doing all this wiring so that when you come at the high risk, high cost period of your adult life, you're more prepared physically, nervous system, it's not a word, but you know what I mean, and emotionally, because you prepared for that. And when we're on screens all the time, we spend less time in nature. So, there's lots of discernment to be used here in how we use social media. And it is a community, but that community should make you feel safe, validated, seen, and loved. So if you're not happy and you don't feel safe when you're using, all these platforms, this sends you a direct message, not only to your brain, your nervous system, and your heart, but your message to your own authentic self. So if this is not making you happy, then you've got your own answer. And yes, being on screens before we go to bed does affect our sleep cycle. So I just think we have to use a little bit more discernment, a little bit more perspective, and to be honest with each other. We can't go through this lifetime without being vulnerable. Vulnerability is key, and there's no authenticity without vulnerability. So let's continue this conversation. And thank you for the incredible allies and speakers, and for the Walrus for bringing us all closer together. Thank you.
Thank you to our talkers, Dr. Emma Duerden, Keith Baybayon, Dr. Candice Odgers, and just now, Sophie Grégoire Trudeau. All right, so much to get into. We are excited to open this up to our audience for our Q&A part of the evening. Let us know where you're tuning in from tonight. Let's see what we got here. Okay, we have audience members registered from all over, including Montreal, bonjour, Medicine Hat, Comics, Fredericton, hello Waterloo, what's up Lethbridge, and welcome Halifax. A reminder, if you have a question for the Q&A, please submit it in the Zoom chat. And Sophie has to depart a bit early, so if you have any questions for her, please get them in now. And at this point, I'd like to welcome back our talkers to the Zoom stage. If you just turn on your cameras, and we will get right into it. Thank you all for your perspectives. I'd like to start with how we should best open up conversations around screen time because as an auntie, often when I'm at, my family's home or my friend's home, it's get off your phones, or here, you can be on your phone for an hour because we have a visitor. And I'm curious the best way to actually talk about screen time rather than it being you spend too much on the screen, or here, we want you to be quiet. Sophie, as someone who speaks to so many young people and you're a parent yourself, any suggestions on how we can start having this conversation?
This is an imperfect situation, right? And there's arguments. Trust me, there are inside of my own household as well. What I've noticed, and this is funny because I just had lunch with a girlfriend who told me that her 16-year-old is grounded because whatever, she had a party she wasn't supposed to have, and she's 2 weeks without a phone. And she said, Soph, everything changed. The way she interacts with us in the kitchen, the way she's more physically in our presence, what she talks about, how she sleeps as well. So the effects, and I also saw the taking away of phones or the monitoring of phones in classrooms, and it has a really big effect on how children are paying attention to the topic choice and the way that they are present. Now, stress, in a very short definition, is a dysfunctional relationship with the present moment. Being on our phones all the time takes us away from the present moment. Now, what is love if it's not presence? So how do we keep so loving and so in tune with each other if we can't be present? That's, I think, is the greatest conversation that we can have, because we can't change our nature as human beings. We have the same primitive brain as, 200,000 years ago. So the way that we live changes. So I think this conversation has to have a lot of compassion towards others and ourselves, and a lot of patience too.
To really connect. Heath, I'd be curious, as someone who is involved in this work, but also I'm sure spends your day chatting with other young people, whether it's on screen or just in person. What's the conversation like from a younger person's perspective?
Yeah, so in terms of actual conversations surrounding screen time, I think it's sort of avoided, like within the young age group, considering the fact a lot of them have very high screen times, and most of that is spent on just really consuming different content, whether that be just watching films or just using social media, and just entertaining themselves in a way. And that sort of paved way for this sort of fear of judgment from others of like, oh, I don't want anyone else knowing about my screen time. I don't want to be able to put myself out there and have all eyes on me. And that makes the approach a bit more difficult, especially, I guess, with the adult standpoint or the parent standpoint, because a lot of the time, parents would blame their kids for just being on their phones. Like, oh, you should be spending more time with me. And as Sophie mentioned, like being really in the present moment. And I can't even avoid that for myself. Like I am guilty of that during my younger years of really gluing my eyes to my iPad just because I really wanted to watch a specific show when I was just 10 years old. But that's the thing, we didn't know any better. That we didn't have any sort of education like within our schools to lessen our screen times or to just really value like the living in the present moment. And that's why like during throughout my work, I really emphasize the importance of providing that education, whether that be within schools or within community programming, acknowledging the dangers of consuming too much screen time, but also in a way finding a balance for yourself, like ensuring that you're still enjoying life out there, reading a book, playing at a park, but also being connected to your friends. Like for me, that was very important because I moved away from the Philippines to Canada. I wanted to be able to stay connected with my family and my friends, and that's what technology did for me. But of course, it's a case by case situation on screen time. It can definitely vary among the different age groups, whether you're from 5 to 8 or 9 to 12. What I find is that the a bit on the older side of the younger age groups is they're a bit more lenient on their screen time now, but definitely on the younger side, their screen times are way above the usual margin.
Thank you. I have a question for Sophie, then I'm going to come to Candice and Emma with a question about the science. Shanna asked Sophie from chat, how can young people not lose their authentic selves while being on social media? And I sometimes wonder, is there a performance of the authentic self as well?
A what? Sorry, Jennifer?
Yeah, Sophie's wondering, how can young people not lose their authentic selves when they're on social media?
Well, I think it's a tricky situation by being aware of what's going on. I think that the educational component here is extremely important, and that the thing that's happening too is that as much as we're like when we're triggered all the time and when we're secreting dopamine and high cortisol, because when you're looking at people's health overall, there's a lot of dopamine and cortisol, and there's lower like serotonin and oxytocin. So what's happening here is that when in Anna Lemke's book Dopamine Nation, you learn that the tipping point, that when the dopamine and cortisol are really high, the relaxing hormones are really low. And what's happening is that teenagers are kind of getting bored with the relaxing hormones. So these relaxing hormones are relationship hormones. Serotonin, the feel good, oxytocin, the cuddling. We are meant to be nervous system to nervous system, eye to eye. Nothing can replace human connection. And Keith, I think it's extraordinary that social media is allowing us to connect with people who are outside of the borders. But as you know, it's never the same thing as a hug, a 30-second hug, or play with each other and be playful. So those important hormones that regulate our bodies and our minds are relational, and we are relational creatures. We are not meant to live in isolation. So to answer the question more directly, how can we not lose our authenticity when we're on social media? Well, I think you just have to be discerning of what social media can have as an impact in your life, because you don't have to lose your authenticity. If something that you're watching or that you're consuming and that you're bringing your attention to, neurons fire together depending on what we bring the attention to, well, then you have your own answer. If you're consuming and it makes you unhappy, you have your answer. And not being always happy is fine. Suffering is okay. Pain is okay. We have to learn to sit with this. But trauma is when there is a constriction, something that closes inside of you, that is your authentic self, and that can't express anymore. So be very discerning of how it makes you feel when you consume, because those are already answers that you might be looking for.
Thank you. Now, Candice and Emma, you're both PhDs, you're doctors, you're experts in your field, you're speaking to the research, and you're saying different things, which if I learned anything during COVID, that's how science works. So I'm curious, and I noticed specifically, Emma, that you said may be more vulnerable. Can you explain how the science and research is evolving, and how is what we're studying now different than, say, 5 years ago, and how might it be different in 5 years down the line? Emma, I would like to start with you and then come to you, Candice.
Great, thank you so much, Jennifer. Actually, I think for what Candice and I are saying are very much aligned. So we know there's not a one-to-one correlation between social media use and adverse mental health outcomes, right? I mean, this is statistically impossible. There are hundreds and millions of accounts held by teens, yet not all of them are using it in the same way. So in turn, there are some individuals who may have risk factors and may be more at risk than others. So like I had mentioned, like those with pre-existing mental health disorders, those who have neurodevelopmental disorders. But we're talking about a large proportion of the population in the end. If we're talking about hundreds of millions of users, and we're talking about I guess a percentage having problematic use disorder, we're talking about a percentage of teens who have ADHD, we're talking about individuals who have undiagnosed mental health. This is adding up to be quite a lot of people in turn. And yeah, I mean, even if there is a small connection between social media and mental health, then I think this still matters. And I think it really adds up for a lot of young people who are suffering right now. And I think that, we can, while there may not be, they may not be the majority, there are a lot of teens who are suffering. And, in terms of like what's happened over the last 5 years, so there was like significant increases in screen time use and social media use in teens. For our studies, like to Keith's point, we're always quite surprised at the numbers that we're hearing. We have teens coming in now to do our brain imaging studies, and they're saying they're online for 15 hours a day. So this is pretty much, yeah, all waking time. So this is like the, extremes, right? So this isn't everyone, right? So those teens who are kind of at risk, where they're spending most of their day completely online, is going to be concerning, for all of those things that I mentioned before, like what Sophie mentioned about, the importance of sleep and, getting nutrition, getting exercise, that sort of thing. So that in turn could have some downstream effects. In the future, yeah, I mean, I wish I had a crystal ball. I mean, wouldn't that be great? If we all did. I think I think this just really highlights that social media use is this is a public health issue that can have effects on both mental and physical health, and in turn, it takes coordinated efforts from governments, communities. We're starting to, we're seeing societal costs, with like that schools are spending millions of dollars on social media related incidences. And so I think this is just really highlighting the need for digital awareness, for public awareness campaigns, but also legislation and policy. And I'll end there. Thanks.
Same question. So one of the things that's really interesting this space is we talk about the online world and the offline world. So social media causing these types of things, but it's a little bit, it might be more helpful to think about these as not separable in the same way. And I think, Keith, you've alluded to this, that there's a huge amount of overlap. And the biggest thing that we've seen in our work is that offline risks predict online risks, right? So if you have a young person in your life that is struggling already with anxiety or social comparisons or difficulties, they're going to have problems in all kinds of settings, right? So you're going to pay closer attention to them when they go into school settings, a new peer group. I coach kids basketball. You're going to have more eyes on them when they're with their peers, and you should have more eyes on them in a social media context as they onboard to that, right? So a lot of parents are getting this message that somehow social media magically causes mental disorder among children, and it's causing this huge rise. But when people that study mental health look at this, they rank order the predictors, and it's one of the least influential factors for the vast majority of kids, right? Now, that's not the case that in some situations with young people that are really struggling, it can have meaningful impacts. There are horrible things that happen in online spaces. There are also horrible things that happen in churches, in schools, right? In sports clubs. And we don't shut those spaces down. What we do is we look at that and we say, how can we go in and allow children to continue to thrive in these spaces, to be safe, to get all people to thrive and be safe in those spaces, and also still reap the kind of opportunities that they have here. So I think there's a real risk kind of in these spaces of thinking that this will be a simple solution. Like, we'll cut off the phones, we'll cut off the social media, and we'll solve this problem. Like these, and I'm not saying that that's what you're saying at all. And I think we're saying a lot of the same things in terms of vulnerabilities. But, that for me, as someone who struggled to like bring attention to mental health issues, to, plan interventions to try and improve the mental health of young people, I would love it if it was smartphones and social media, because we could shut those things off. Right. We could, things like child poverty, right? Things like family victimization and abuse that we know, early loss, all this adversity that Emma referred to when she first started. If we could just shut off the phones and make all of that not contribute to the problems our children have, that would be great. And so there's just a little bit of care, I think, that needs to be taken in this discussion of youth mental health, because right now, smartphones and social media are really sucking all the air out of the room, right? And my response to this kind of question is to really see the person in front of you, what they need, how they're doing. For some kids, the phone will have nothing to do with it at all. For other kids, they might be engaging in some risky behaviors online and offline, and this might be an opportunity to intervene or get an early warning sign. So it's complicated. I know that is not a story that sells easily, or soothes anyone, but it really is.
I'm hearing from both of you, don't generalize.
Yeah.
I have a question here for Keith. This is from Pierre in our audience. Efforts are underway here in Canada and internationally to put in place age assurance mechanisms to protect youth and children from access to social media for those under 16, for those under 18 in the case of pornography. As the youngest person on this panel, I'd appreciate your opinion on such efforts?
Yep, thank you for the question. This was a prevalent discussion we had, especially at our youth assembly on digital rights and safety, because what we found is that Canada was lacking something great. It was compared to the United Kingdom, they have the age-appropriate design code to ensure that companies and social media corporations are building these specific apps and platforms for the needs of children to ensure that they're safe. They have privacy regulations in place as they create their accounts, and prioritizing their mental health and safety in the online world. And I think Canada right now is in the process of actually fulfilling that sort of mandate for the teens and also the younger generations with the online harms bill. Because this specific bill carries a lot of specific sections. For example, creating more digital safety commission to ensure that companies like within Canada itself are submitting like their safety mechanisms towards this commission and sort of having approval to that, while also ensuring that more apps are following these specific standards to ensure that they fit the standards of what our youth need to ensure that they're safe, um, they're not being exploited, and their information is kept to a minimum in the online world. Because at this point, youth are unaware of what is being collected of their data, what their data is being used for. And I work with the Information Privacy Commissioner. It's very crucial to ensure that we're educating our youth on the importance of privacy, on the importance of safeguarding their privacy rights in the digital space. So I think the importance of the age-appropriate design code, like within the UK, to be definitely translated within Canada, and I think we are finally at the right step in doing so, and I'm excited to see what this bill carries on for the future. But at the same time, I definitely do think it's important to take action right now and acknowledging the effects uh, of having unregulated social media platforms and these corporations be exposed to youth, because it can lead to such exploitative measures such as um, lowering their attention spans to the point where you can only really pay attention to 6 seconds of a video at a time, or not being able to really prioritize the other important aspects of their life, whether that be spending time with their friends or just experiencing nature. So I think it's definitely a conversation to continue, and I'm really excited to see what comes for Canada in the world.
Thank you. We have two people at home asking a similar question, so I'm going to direct this both to Emma and Candice. Rajender and John asked, how do the panelists see recent cell phone bans across different provinces playing out, helping or harming kids? So Emma, I'd love your take, and then we'll come to you, Candice.
Yeah, for the cell phone bans that was just implemented here in the province in Ontario, where I'm based. And so in terms of how it's playing out and, for the overall response, I can say from my students who are pre-service teachers in classrooms that they do struggle quite often, even switching from one task to another, even like a 30-second lull between tasks. Prior to the ban, they noted that, teens would have their phones out, to check like sports scores or social media or something like that. But it's very difficult to then start moving on to the next task. So, for the for the cell phone bans, we're going to learn about them, as the data is going to come out. But essentially by not necessarily having that distraction, people often think that multitasking leads us to be more productive, but it can often have, like the opposite effect. So for other countries that have implemented cell phone bans, they've reported some positive outcomes, that it can have impact on learning and memory. But other studies have reported that there's been no effects. So I think it's going to be contextual. It's going to depend, and if these bans even can be implemented successfully, because in the end, it can just come down to specific teachers in classrooms. So it may be very challenging to implement. I'll just end there, I think.
Thank you. And Candice, last word to you both with this question, and if you want to comment on anything before.
Yeah, so I'm living here in the United States where there's a big push to ban books, to ban cell phones, and to ban women's choices, right? And so when I hear bans, I get a little nervous. Now, with that said, phones in the classroom, I think that's the autonomy of the teacher and the principal, and only for learning and only for accessibility, and lots of freedom there. But I think we have to be very careful when people start to march towards a ban and thinking that they're solving for a problem, that they're protecting kids, that they're saving kids, that they're preventing mental health, when we don't know, like Emma said, that that's actually the result of any of these things. Keith, I want to touch on your point. You made such a crucially important point about the right you have to keep your data private from these companies, from these algorithms, to have better protections as a consumer. And then there's this huge tension, right? All of these age verification, and I know you know this, all these age verification models, they require not only children to verify their age, but every user, right? So every user would have to now give all of our information to these technology companies, right? So they'll know you'll need your bank information, maybe your passport, right? Now we have all of our information handed over to these tech companies, and they know a lot about us from what we do online, right? So the amount of privacy violations that would happen from that kind of big handover are going to be really, really complicated. So I think, this is one of those examples I bring up because on the surface of it, it sounds like the right thing to do. So let's do these kind of age cutoffs, but then it's in the how. The devil is always in the details, and often in the how of these policy recommendations, those most vulnerable get excluded from spaces, their information is left to be vulnerable, and we really just have to play out the next step of what happens next after this policy or this law or this ban comes into effect. So it's a big issue, Keith, and I'm glad that you're leading young people to work on it, because that's exactly who we need to be at the center of these conversations and of these solutions. So thank you for doing that.
Well, thanks again to our speakers. We've reached the end of our Q&A session, so you can turn off your cameras, and I'm going to give you another round of thanks and thank our audience for joining us. Thank you. You just heard from Dr. Emma Duerden, Keith Baybayon, Dr. Candice Odgers, and Sophie Grégoire Trudeau. If you enjoyed today's talks, we have more coming up. Mark your calendars for the Walrus Talks Menopause. That's right, we're talking about menopause out in the open. This is taking place on Thursday, October 17th. We're going to demystify the whole journey from peri to post about how menopause impacts women's health. You can join us in person in Toronto or sign up for the online live stream. Keep an eye on your inbox. You're going to receive a follow-up email from us. The best way to stay in touch with the Walrus is to opt into our newsletter if you haven't already. You can also visit us at thewalrus.ca/events. That's where you can browse our event schedule, see what we have coming up, register for events, and we will be posting the video from this Talks at Home and all of our videos online at the Walrus Talks video room on our website. The Walrus is home to Canada's community-supported conversation, and that means our journalism, our events are powered by people just like you. As a registered charity with an educational mandate, we rely on your support to power independent, fact-based journalism and thought-provoking events. So if you enjoyed this free event this evening, join our community of donors in supporting Canada's conversation. You can donate online at thewalrus.ca/support to ensure that we can continue this work ahead. Thank you again to our partners, Brain Canada and RBC Future Launch, for their generous support. Thank you to our annual sponsors, Air Canada, Bullfrog Power, Inspire, RBC Emerging Artists, and Odgers. And thank you for tuning in. Lots to think about, and we look forward to continuing this conversation. Have a great evening.